Chapter 21, Images. I don't like that. Though Silas thought about this, he didn't dismiss it outright for two reasons. First, he didn't unlock this comprehension until he broke free from the madness. So, there was a chance that losing his mind wasn't a requirement, and it was actually the exact opposite. Second, what choice did he have? He had finally found a reasonable method of making it out of here. If he could use the barrier to enter the state of madness, and then break free continuously, wouldn't he unlock his comprehension fully? Maybe this madness comprehension could help him to beat the python. With this thought, Silas didn't waste time. The situation was a bit helpless. He had only gotten 2 genes out of his soft gene state and time was ticking away. Now that he had some hope again, he couldn't waste any more time than he needed to. You have survived the madness. Your comprehension of the madness has deepened, +1 will. You have survived the madness. Your comprehension of the madness has deepened, +1 will. You have survived the madness. Your comprehension of the madness has deepened, +1 will. You have survived the madness. Your comprehension of the madness has deepened, +1 will. It was easier than Silas could have ever imagined. The first time, he almost threw himself toward his death. But now, he didn't even suffer a debuff, and he broke free after just a few seconds. The worst he experienced was the tensing of his body, that feeling of his blood rushing through him, and then it all went away. He began to truly study the images. They flashed for just a short time, but for some reason, they began to linger in his mind for longer and longer. It wasn't just a wild array of snakes any longer, but it became a dance of sorts, a ritual painted in its own sort of beauty. One of an animal bound to the earth, hoping to one day soar once again. Of a creature marred by its own madness. You have survived the madness. Your comprehension of the madness has deepened, you have comprehended the madness. +3 will. +10 charisma. Silas looked at his stat screen. Name, Silas Grimblade, species, human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage, level, 0. Titles, a flexible will, a patient stalker, physical, 8. Greater than, strength, 5. Greater than, constitution, 5. Greater than, dexterity, 13. Greater than, speed, 8. Mental, 9. Greater than, intelligence, 5. Greater than, wisdom, 10. Greater than, charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skill. Comprehensions, madness, F. Gene state, soft. Fragmented genes, Grimblade lineage, F2, dexterity, F. Gene talents, blade aura, mutated weakened, sudden burst, dormant, F. With his intention, Silas focused deeper on madness. Madness, F. The madness consumes you, but does not control you. Instead, it becomes your tool to both control yourself and others. You, while steeped in madness, maintain your wits about you. Your enemies, though, are not so lucky. +100% charisma. +100% will. Charisma. It seems that this isn't just a boost to myself, but it forms an intention that attacks my enemies. Charisma was a stat that decided how much of your own will you could impose on an opponent. Silas still wasn't sure exactly what this meant, but in this context, it should mean that he could force his enemies to face the same madness as himself. But is this helpful? When Silas was steeped in the madness, he just wanted to fight for longer and harder. Sure, he almost threw himself to his death, but if his enemies were much stronger than him, it would just make him die faster. Silas didn't let the angst get to him so quickly this time, and he chose to test it out first. With some intention of his will, he activated madness by stirring his comprehension. He felt an odd force field take shape around him, one that he had already begun to vaguely feel after his charisma reached 12. Now, however, it was more obvious, and the world even turned a slight shade of red. Veins bulged across Silas' body, but as expected, he was able to remain calm. It doesn't really feel different. It's a lot like my dexterity. It feels like I can pull out the peak of my strength, but it doesn't necessarily add to my strength, it only increases my control of it. Silas put this feeling to the test by running around a bit. My pain feels duller. It's easier to ignore. My body control is a lot greater. Though my dexterity stat hasn't changed at all, it feels like it's at least doubled. The same can be said for my stamina, even though it's not a shown stat. My body control is on a level where I'm at peak efficiency all the time. I wonder if Silas activated Blade Aura. He just wanted to see if the added stamina might impact it, too. His brows shot up. The formerly silvery light had a tinge of red to it now. It was steadier, and definitely far stronger. The time ticked by, and as expected, even after a minute, it didn't show signs of fading. Even after 2, it was still fine. It was only after 3 that Silas began to feel some fatigue, but it wasn't coming from his blade aura at all, but rather the usage of madness. He exhaled a breath and let the feeling dissipate. The same wave of fatigue he usually got after using up blade aura didn't come. This feeling was much more stable and relaxing, as though he had just spent a little bit too long reading. He knew he could have pushed himself much further, but likewise he would have risked falling into the madness well and truly. Silas went back to the barrier to see if he could use it to continue increasing his will. He had a feeling that the higher his will stat, the longer he'd be able to use madness for. Unfortunately, the barrier couldn't even affect him anymore. He had already expected this, but he had to cover all his bases. The only thing left to do is to hope that this is enough, then. He was about to turn his attention to the python again. According to his plan, he would test the ends of the madness, and when there was nothing else to learn, he would go and fight. But then something about these images caught his attention again. Chapter 22, Lost. They were even clearer now than they were before. There were 3 distinct sections. The battle section, the mating section, and the bearing fangs section. Each one exuded its own peculiarity. In the past, they had blurred into a single bundle of madness. But now that Silas had actually comprehended madness, he could feel the subtleties. Silas became a bit lost. It was odd. He could innately tell what the snakes were doing, but he didn't have an easy method of translating it to his own body. There was a barrier that lay between him and them. It was one part frustrating, but another part curious. He was ultimately a scholar. He had spent more time than he knew with his head buried deep in his research or a paper of some sort. His discipline was often what carried him through those moments, but often it was fascination as well. His doctoral thesis had been about moving the world of antivenom toward the world of vaccines, namely mRNA vaccines. It was quite useless, honestly. A large part of why venom used antivenom as a counter, a more short-term solution, was because venomous creatures were rare and only a small segment of the population met them. No one would feel the need to immunize a large population of people against a snake they only had a 1 in a billion chance of coming across. Even so, he had been fascinated by the topic because of the mongoose. It was a small, almost adorable creature, and yet it was well known as the bane of venomous snakes due to its natural defenses against venom. He had found it funny that a cute little creature could do what humans couldn't, so he had chosen this route for his doctorate. It was just pure curiosity. Something about this felt so similar. Silas suddenly shook his head, feeling that he was getting sucked in deep. When he did, he found that his body had recovered from the madness already. Has it been that long? Or was it something else? He wasn't sure, until he saw something new. Skill, Madden Meditation, F. Silas had been so engrossed that he hadn't noticed this change at all. He hadn't known that it was possible to miss notifications. Madden Meditation, F. You are deeply in tune with the madness of your ancestors. It helps you to focus and relax. Understanding yourself is a form of peace, and with peace comes healing. It was only after reading the description that Silas realized the oddity. All the time he had spent, observing, the mural of snakes, he had been thinking about himself. He hadn't even thought about his doctorate in years. Why had it even come to mind? It wasn't like Silas was passionate about snakes, he just found them somewhat interesting. And he was feeling that now he might be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie on one hand, and a control freak on another. What was a better rush of adrenaline than handling creatures that could kill you with a single nick? And what was a better form of control than facing them without a hint of fear? I'm insane. Silas was speechless toward his own thoughts. He felt that he had great self-discipline, and he even had daily meditation rituals. Simply put, he spent a lot of time in his own mind, but he had never assessed himself in this way. Was it because of the madness? Was it influencing him more than he thought? Or was this truly him? Silas pulled away from the barrier and looked at his notification. The moment he wondered if there was a way to check what he had missed, a new menu appeared. This menu seemed to list all of his previous notifications in chronological order, starting with the most recent. Everything looked normal and the only thing he had missed was the new skill. He wasn't sure how powerful or weak this skill was, though. He found himself once again feeling that there was too great a lack of information coming from the system. The system is already enough of a help. I'm not sure what I'd do if it didn't exist. Silas concluded his thoughts with that and turned his focus toward understanding everything about madness now. With Madden meditation as a support skill, it went along much faster. Upon activation, the most obvious change was his stat boost to charisma and will. However, Silas felt that this was only a surface-level change. The elevation of charisma and will likewise seemed to bolster his other stats. Although it wasn't reflective in the numbers, it just felt like his body was running like a well-oiled machine, almost like his stats just meant more per point. This was most obviously reflected in Blade Aura, which could now be used for just over 3 minutes. What was more interesting than that was that Blade Aura also seemed to be applicable to his body now. Well, it was before as well. But this time, it didn't make him feel like he was boiling from the inside out. When it was applied solely to his body, it could last for about 5 minutes, which was the whole length he could have madness activated for as well. However, while Blade Aura could last longer applied directly to his fists, it was also weaker. The quality-based amplification was still there and obvious. Clearly, Blade Aura believed his femur short spear was the better weapon. Madden meditation made the various experiments far easier on Silas. It only took about 5 minutes to recover completely from 5 minutes of usage, so it was a nice trade-off. Without Madden meditation, it took upwards of half an hour. It was just unfortunate that he couldn't use Madden meditation on the move. He had to be completely still, and except in this environment where the only threat was locked away in a far-off region, he would be hard-pressed to find a place where it would be easy to use it. Silas took a breath. It seemed that really was all there was this time. It was time to see what this little madness creature was all about. Chapter 23, Little Madness. Little Madness, F, Level, 0. Physical, 31, Mental, 3. Will, 6. Dash. Silas looked at the creature again. Seeing that its will was so low, he had some questions himself about how this would go. Madness was obviously part of what this dungeon wanted him to comprehend, but he had also done it in a very unconventional way. Or so he assumed. But if this python could use madness as well, wouldn't it lose its mind almost instantly? Even with 36 will, Silas could only use madness for 5 minutes. How would this creature fare? Silas picked up a rock and tried to throw it right at the python's head. But before it made it far, it bounced off a barrier. Seems it won't let me play any tricks. This probably means if I take a step in there, I won't be able to exit. The python didn't even react to the change, but Silas took note that the barrier here was identical to the large one that surrounded the entire forest. He rushed in. Much like always, when he made a decision, he never hesitated. The python stirred awake, its scales rippling as its orange-black slit eyes landed right on Silas. It opened its jaw, and a scream came from it. It was a cross between a steam engine's whistle and a hacking cough. It was the kind of thing one would never expect to come from a snake at all. And then it pounced. Silas activated madness. The one thing he hadn't been able to test was how his comprehension could influence other creatures, because there weren't any creatures around to influence. However, there was one thing he had noticed previously. When he pushed his will outward, using his charisma as a conduit to impose his thoughts onto the world, it went beyond just an ethereal result. Back then, he had been able to push the shoreline of the lake away from him. It was just a few centimeters, and hardly noticeable. But when his intention was poured onto the snake, its acceleration plummeted and its eyes turned red. It seemed to lose focus on Silas and its body thrashed about wildly. As expected, the strength and constitution of the snake were off the charts, but its speed and dexterity were lacking. Silas ducked beneath the swing of its tail and slashed his Blade Aura-infused antler blade at its scales. The femur short spear was his best weapon, but he didn't want to use it just yet, not until he understood just how hard the defenses of this python were. Soon, he realized he was right to be cautious. His attack did nothing but slightly push the head of the python toward the ground. His blade rebounded off of its scales as though he was a toddler trying to wrestle with his parent. Silas ducked and rolled, leaping back to his feet on the other side of the thrashing python. It was beginning to move more and more wildly, attacking every and anything indiscriminately. The reaction was fiercer than what Silas had expected, but it also didn't put the python out of commission. Considering the disparity in will, and likely charisma, Silas would have hoped to do more than just make this powerful creature rampage about like this, but he considered himself lucky to even be in this position to begin with. Maybe I can tire it out, Silas thought. He didn't want to gamble on it. He could only last for 5 minutes, and the constitution of this snake was so high. Who was to say that it would run out of energy to give before him? Attacking its eyes is the best chance. I can only hope that ether doesn't help these creatures to be invulnerable to even such a sensitive location. Silas' gaze sharpened as he circled around Little Madness. He didn't dare to release Madness for fear that the snake would regain control of itself soon after. He had no choice but to end this within 5 minutes. He suddenly accelerated forward. Silas only had 5 strength. It wasn't a surprise to him that his attack wasn't strong enough to injure a beast like this. He would have to lean on his strengths. With the python thrashing about so wildly, most wouldn't be able to do anything about it. How could you target such a small target when the rest of it was moving so erratically? But the moment Little Madness entered a relatively central part of the clearing, Silas burst into action again. He raised his bone-short spear up in an overhand grip. Veins pulsed across his body, his green eyes gaining just the slightest sheen of red to them. There. He struck down, piercing right into the python's eye. However, he miscalculated. It wasn't his strike itself. What he didn't realize in this state of absolute madness was that Little Madness couldn't even feel pain. It didn't change its actions in the slightest, still madly lashing out at everything there was. It was a common misconception that animals didn't feel pain the way humans did. It was evolutionarily beneficial to them to hide their pain so that they could survive in the wild, but they felt pain much the same way humans did, if not more so. In fact, many of the most predatory beasts in existence were maybe even more cowardly than humans as well. Unfortunately, in a state of madness, the python didn't care for any of that. Silas dodged backward, forced to let go of his bone spear. The python continued to madly thrash about, so much so that it headbutted the barrier, shattering Silas' femur short spear and driving it further into its skull. Finally, Little Madness shuddered. Even in its last moment, it probably didn't notice that it had done this to itself. But Silas couldn't even feel happy. His jaw clenched. He had lost his best weapon, just like that. Chapter 24, Assimilation. He truly regretted not going back to get the second short spear he had created, but he didn't think he had the time to do so. With the night already waning, if he tried to do a round trip, he might get caught up in battles as the creatures began to wake up. What he had feared the most weren't the land animals, though, but rather the creatures he had spotted sleeping in the lake. He was already hardly a match on land. If he had to fight in the water, he would be finished. Silas took a breath and exhaled. Nothing had gone right this whole time, but hadn't he made it here? You have slain Little Madness. Floor 1 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Greater than Little Madness skill. Greater than Inflexible Gene Elixir consumable. Greater than Little Madness Slayer title. Silas frowned. Pushing forward with his intention, he clicked each one for more information. Little Madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a power boost. Wasn't this just a far weaker version of his madness comprehension? Plus, this seemed to come with side effects his madness comprehension didn't have at all. Inflexible Gene Stat Elixir consumable. A medicine for the soul and not for the taste. Drink this and maintain an inflexible gene state for 3 days. This wasn't entirely useless. Although he had a soft gene state right now, which was 2 levels above this, it wouldn't last forever. Still, it was a bit shabby. His soft gene state gave him a 50% success rate of claiming new genes, but this would only give him a 10% chance of success. It was unfortunate. Little Madness Slayer title. You have taken down an apprentice of the madness. Keep going and one day you just might step onto the path of true madness. +1 will. +1 charisma. Silas shook his head, especially when he saw what happened to his stat menu afterward. Name, Silas Grimblade. Species, Human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade Lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical, 8. Greater than, Strength, 5. Greater than, Constitution, 5. Greater than, Dexterity, 13. Greater than, Speed, 8. Mental, 9. Greater than, Intelligence, 5. Greater than, Wisdom, 10. Greater than, Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skill, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F2, Dexterity, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. For some reason, the Little Madness Slayer title was dormant, and he didn't even get the stat boosts from them. He didn't really need more will or charisma, but it wouldn't exactly hurt either. In summary, though, he had gotten very little out of this victory aside from the right to go and risk his life again on the second floor. He had a skill that was useless, a title that was dormant, and an elixir he would probably only drink if he really had no other options. Even then, he had to figure out a convenient way to carry this elixir around with him because he didn't have a bag. I could try to make one out of the fox skins. Silas decided he would do this before looking toward his final hope, Little Madness Corpse. He walked over and put a hand on its head. Little Madness. Genes detected. Fragmented gene, 7. Constitution, F. Attempt assimilation. Yes, no. Silas' brows raised. His grandfather hadn't told him this was possible, but this made sense. Maybe it was a case of if a creature assimilated enough fragmented genes, they would form a common gene, so on and so forth. This would make his 50% chance worth far more, assuming that it did so one by one and wasn't an all-or-nothing sort of situation. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Gene assimilation successful. Gene assimilation successful. Gene assimilation failed. Gene assimilation successful, gene assimilation failed, gene assimilation failed, gene assimilation successful, Constitution, 9. Silas exhaled a breath when he saw this. 4 of 7 was a good outcome. He was happy that it wasn't an all-or-nothing situation. Although it would have been amazing to get all 7, just in a risk assessment sort of situation like this one, this was for the best. Floor 2, he quietly thought to himself. He put a hand on Little Madness, hoping it would allow him to take it. He had no method of cutting apart those hard scales, but maybe he would find one on the next floor. Silas' vision blurred, and when he appeared again, he was standing on a familiar cobblestone road. In the distance, it split in 2 directions, just like last time. After a moment, Silas lugged the heavy 5-meter-long python over his shoulder and began to walk toward the forest again. As much as he was curious about what was down the other path, he wasn't in a position to take risks for the hell of it. He would stick with what he knew for now and hope the situation would be the same. Chapter 25, Fangs. This was the only thought he could finish before a snake jumped out from a nearby bush, its jaws opening wide. Silas couldn't even register exactly what it was. He just let his legs fall out from under him. With the pressure of Little Madness weight on his shoulders, he winced. He hadn't had the time to brush the carcass off his shoulders and could only do his best to survive. The snake soared over his head even as Silas lost his balance, the python corpse tilting him to one side. He couldn't pop back up quickly, and his legs folded under him awkwardly. Danger signs blared in his mind, not because he had awakened some magical sense for it, but because he knew he was screwed. He had been paying attention to his surroundings because he knew it was foolish to assume that floor 2 would be the exact same as floor 1. He just didn't expect that he would be attacked so suddenly. For all he knew, the snake that had just soared over his head was already doubling back, ready for round 2, and here he was, pinned beneath the dead python. Focus. He activated madness without even trying to look back. He knew that if he wasted too much time, he would be finished. He still hadn't recovered from his battle with Little Madness, so he only had a minute or so left. The regret of not finding a place to use Madden meditation first hit him. This was a new world. He always had to be near 100% so long as he could spare the time. What was he rushing to enter a new floor for? With a grunt, he pushed the corpse off of him. Ignoring the dull pain in his right leg, he popped back up to his feet, whipping around toward where the sneak-attacking snake had gone. But he saw nothing but a line of trees. He didn't see anything, but that didn't mean he didn't hear anything. There was a wild thrashing in the grass, and when Silas approached it, he found a snake of a little under 3 feet long. Its tail suddenly moved wildly and slapped against a tree trunk, blowing a chunk of the bark off of it. So strong. Silas had a lot of experience corralling snakes, but he gave up on any idea of that when he saw that tail whip. Madness Minion F. Level 0. Physical 27. Mental 2. Will 4. I'm running out of time, Silas thought, watching the snake wildly whip its body around without a care for its life. His head spun back to the python's corpse. He was ashamed of the idea he had just had, but he really couldn't think of anything else. The experience with Little Madness had taught him that there was truly no chance for him to deal a death blow to these monstrous creatures. He needed something that could. He picked up the head of the dead python, pulling it toward the thrashing Madness minion. By now, the much smaller snake had made it into the small path of grass leading to the boss of floor 2, making it much easier on Silas. The Madness minion didn't understand anything that was going on around it, it just wanted to attack something, anything. And yet, it didn't have the wherewithal to realize there was prey right in front of it. Silas opened the jaws of Little Madness wide, baring its teeth for it. His green eyes never left the wildly moving snake. He knelt to a knee, his arm arching from holding up just the head of this monstrous boss creature. He wouldn't have more than one chance. The time he had left could be counted in the few seconds. When it fell below 10, he could already feel the weight of fatigue pushing at his mind. He knew what would happen if he pushed past his limit. He would truly fall into the madness, and he would be no different from the snake before him. The difference was that there would be no escaping from him. He pushed everything he had to the forefront, pulling deep as the snake got close. Now. The moment he moved, he knew he missed. The weapon was too awkward. How could he use the jaws of a creature that weighed hundreds of pounds to deal with a creature that was a fraction of the size and far faster? It was the most foolish plan he could have come up with, but it was the only option he had. He didn't know what would happen if he just tried to run away. Would he run into another beast? How many of them were in this forest with him? Also, what would happen to the snake once the influence of his madness left it? Would it still be in range to chase him? This much smaller beast had a weaker physical than Little Madness, but its speed was much greater. He didn't have a chance at outrunning it. And given the fact it could jump at his head from the ground despite only being over 2 feet long, he probably couldn't escape it by going up a tree either. Not that he was even confident in climbing one. I'm going to miss. The swirl of thoughts hit him like a whirlwind as his madness timer fell to just 3 seconds. His will moved out in a flood, catching onto the wildly thrashing snake. He wasn't going to miss by much. He could feel that it would only be by an inch or two. The weapon was too awkward and his dexterity and strength weren't high enough. But that was when this moment aligned with another. A moment where he had moved the shoreline of water back just enough. And under the influence of his charisma, will, and madness, the trajectory of the snake's wild movement shifted just enough that a single side of Little Madness fang tore into its body. Chapter 26, Head. Silas felt his madness state slip away from him just as Madness Minion was pinned down beneath the jaws of the much heavier snake. To his surprise, even after his madness faded, the snake hadn't regained its bearings. It continued to wildly thrash about, but this time in a far more confined region, the weight of the python's corpse keeping it mostly in place. Silas took deep breaths. So it doesn't fade away immediately. He felt a wave of relief hit him. Unfortunately, the job wasn't done quite yet. He had wounded the snake heavily, but not fatally. His brows shot up. The thrashing of the snake slowed, and the entry to its wound actually began to corrode. A python is venomous. This flipped Silas' world upside down. Constrictors were constrictors, and venomous snakes were venomous snakes. They took two different routes of evolution, so it was considered unnecessary by Mother Nature herself for the two to share both. Another mistake. Silas hadn't even considered that these animals would be venomous. The moment he saw such a large creature, he made the assumption immediately. This time, his experience had almost really hurt him. He could be dead right now. Will the poison affect the genes? Silas rushed forward. Madness minion. Gene detected. Fragmented gene, 3, speed, F. Attempt assimilation. Yes, no. Silas confirmed. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Gene assimilation failed. Gene assimilation failed. Gene assimilation successful. Name, Silas Grimblade. Species, human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical, 9. Greater than, Strength, 5. Greater than, Constitution, 9. Greater than, Dexterity, 13. Greater than, Speed, 9. Mental, 9. Greater than, Intelligence, 5. Greater than, Wisdom, 10. Greater than, Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skill, Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F2, Dexterity, F4, Constitution, F, Speed, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Unlucky. Silas didn't linger on the thought more than this. At the very least, the venom didn't ruin the genes, at least he thought so. It was possible that it had 4 or more speed genes to give, but that was something he'd have to pay attention to in the future. He scanned the region, checking to see if anything else was coming. He was fairly sure this madness minion wouldn't be the only one on floor 2, so he had no choice but to continue being cautious. The quasi-kinetic abilities his madness comprehension was giving him were likely something that he should explore more, but right now it felt too weak. It felt more like an auxiliary offshoot ability rather than something baked into the comprehension itself. Even so, it had definitely helped him just now. He would also have to do some experiments on the next madness minion he came across. How long did he have to activate his madness for it to have lasting effects? Was it just a single instant? Was it dependent on the target's will? He needed to know. Regardless, his madness comprehension was his greatest reliance right now. He needed it for more than its influence on his opponents, but it would be nice to know that he wouldn't die the moment he ran out of it. Running away was definitely an option now. There was also something else of interest to consider. When I fell into the madness, my only thoughts were to go and challenge the boss as quickly as possible. But these creatures lose their rationality and even forget my existence. Is it because of low wisdom? There were so many factors at play and it felt impossible to pinpoint them all. For now, he had to recover. Sticking close to the region the madness minion had attacked him from, he activated Madden Meditation. His grandfather had said that dungeons were easier to clear than spawned cities because there were tighter controls on the variables, so his assumption was that there was a low likelihood another snake would attack him from here anytime soon. Simply put, this was probably the safest location on the entire floor now. In 5 minutes, he was back up and running. He found that Madden Meditation didn't just help with his mental fatigue, either. It felt similar to eating the fox. He felt rejuvenated. He stood. By now, the madness minion's corpse was mostly rotted. This was, without a doubt, the most potent venom he had ever seen. But he was counting on that. He carefully pulled the python's jaws open again and placed it to the side. Then, using the antler blade and blade aura, he cut into the rotten flesh. As expected, it was far easier than it had been previously and he sliced into the creature, leaving nothing but its head. It fit nicely in his palm, though the blood was less than great. Am I really about to use a snake's head as a weapon? The incredulity of it all wasn't lost on him, but this was the best option he had right now, that and running. Snake fangs were actually quite fragile and could be easily broken. They had good piercing power, but were brittle. I probably can't rely on the venom. Assuming they're the same general species, all the madness minions will be resistant to this venom, and I obviously can't use the python. It's too heavy. Go for the head. That was the best he could do. Chapter 27, Limit. Name, Silas Grimblade, Species, Human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade Lineage, Level, 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical: 11. Greater than Strength, 5. Greater than Constitution, 9. Greater than Dexterity, 13. Greater than Speed, 17. Mental, 9. Greater than Intelligence, 5. Greater than Wisdom, 10. Greater than Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skill: Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F2, Dexterity, F4, Constitution, F9, Speed, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Silas placed a hand on the corpse of yet another Madness minion. Madness minion. Gene detected. Fragmented Gene, 4, Speed, F. Attempt assimilation. Yes, no. After several battles, Silas had confirmed that the venom had, indeed, had an impact on the genes. All the Madness minions he had defeated until now had 4 fragmented speed genes. Only the first one had 3. So that seemed to be the best explanation. What happened next, though, caught him off guard. Yes. Genetic limit reached. Please increase level, change class, or evolve race to proceed. Fragmented gene less than Grimblade lineage greater than has taken effect, soft gene state weakened by 10% for related genes, genetic limit increased. Genetic assimilation starting, genetic assimilation triggered, gene assimilation failed, gene assimilation failed, gene assimilation failed, gene assimilation successful. Genetic limit, increase level, change class, evolve race, this will be a problem. Silas hadn't thought about there being a genetic limit to consider. And even if there was one, he didn't expect that his own would be as low as 9. Didn't that mean that if he didn't have the Grimblade lineage, he wouldn't even be able to unlock Sudden Burst in the future? Is 9 the limit for all genes? Or is it just speed? If it's different based on gene type, other than dexterity, speed was my highest starting physical stat. Doesn't that mean I'm already close to my limit on constitution, which started at almost half that of speed? Maybe I can get other genes that do similar things. Like the Grimblade lineage is named differently, so maybe there's another lineage that adds to speed. Would it clash with the original speed stats, or no? There were too many questions and not enough information. Just like his grandfather had said it would be. You have collected 10 fragmented speed genes, would you like to fuse them? Yes, no. Silas took a breath and moved his intention toward yes. Fusion commencing. Silas' body froze. The feeling was much stronger than it had been in the past. It was like countless ice cubes touching each one of his pores with pinpoint accuracy. And yet, somehow, it felt scorchingly hot everywhere else. Fusion complete. Name: Silas Grimblade. Species: Human, F. Affiliation: Grimblade lineage. Level: 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, A Patient Stalker, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical: 14. Greater than Strength, 5. Greater than Constitution, 9. Greater than Dexterity, 13. Greater than Speed, 28. Mental, 9. Greater than Intelligence, 5. Greater than Wisdom, 10. Greater than Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skill: Madden Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F2, Dexterity, F4, Constitution, F. Common Genes, Speed, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. It's worth 20 now, Silas thought. One common gene was worth 20 stats, that was a huge leap. Although there were all these fancy numbers, and they were jumping across his screen now, Silas remained quite calm because he remembered something quite important. These were all relative stats. According to what the Grimblades had said, there were 6 total events just like this one in the past, events where there might have been much less intelligent creatures taking part. But ones that were all far more powerful. What strength would a Tyrannosaurus Rex have had? What speed would a raptor have? Forget about extinct creatures. What about creatures that were still alive to this day? What stats would the system give a blue whale? What about a cheetah? A speed of 28 only meant one thing to Silas: he was much faster than other humans, and that was all. In fact, because his dexterity had begun to lag behind, he couldn't even maximize that speed without activating madness. This wasn't the only disadvantage humans were at, either. Because this was the 7th attempt of their world, they were basically dealing with the scraps. For example, titles. The strongest titles were ones related to progenitors, the first to do and accomplish certain things. In the past, Silas might have gotten a title for comprehending madness. But by now, all of those titles were gone. The easiest boost to stats in the early game had already been used up by the former failures of Earth. He had to maximize his time in this dungeon or else he would only fall further behind these creatures. After another bout of meditation, he approached the boss. It didn't seem like there were any other madness minions to take advantage of. Near the end, he had formed a pretty good system for himself. With his speed increasing, it was easier to deal with the wild movements of the snakes. In addition, he had realized he barely had to use madness for a few seconds for them to lose themselves for several minutes. Due to that, he could slowly find an opportunity and strike. Essentially, he had bided his time and waited for them to tire themselves out. One snake had died, quite literally, of exhaustion. Its heart had given out. It made Silas realize just how dangerous madness was. What if he used it on humans? Could he snap them out of it before they died? He had tested that out and water seemed to work quite well, but only if he had activated madness for a short enough time. If he held it for as long as he had against Little Madness, even driving a spear through their brains wouldn't wake someone up. His eyes landed on the snake. It was much smaller than Little Madness had been, ironically. It was a sleek black color with sporadic violet scales that popped with color from time to time. It was about 4 feet long, or just over a meter. This told Silas all he needed to know. It was likely another speed type. Middle Madness. Level, 0. Physical, 42. Mental, 7. Will, 11. Chapter 28, Middle Madness. This was the first time Silas had seen a creature with such a strong will, but he felt that was more in line with the theme of the dungeon. The more he thought about it, the weirder he felt that his will was so high compared to these creatures. Didn't he comprehend madness from this place? So why were the wills of these creatures so poor? Maybe I'm looking down on humans a bit too much. We're far inferior in the physical stats, but we seem to have these animals beat in terms of mental and will stats. Silas burst into action, madness already activated. Middle Madness didn't even have the time to open its eyes before that rush of insanity hit it. Silas maintained his distance. This was the strongest will any target of his had ever had, so he wasn't sure how resistant it would be. Luckily, it didn't seem to matter. However, what was interesting was that Middle Madness didn't start rampaging instantly. It seemed to try to resist, but it only lasted a few seconds before it lost control. Silas' eyes widened. Middle Madness was like a bolt of lightning. It shot out so quickly and in so many directions that Silas heard the clashes before he saw the streaks. Familiar flashing patterns of fighting, mating, and roaring snakes appeared, but they were much more vibrant and livelier than they had been on the first floor. In fact, because Middle Madness was slamming against the barrier so frequently, it stayed lit for much longer than Silas was used to. Silas almost entered another daze before a whistling wind by his ear snapped him right out of it. What was he thinking? He was in the middle of battle. But Middle Madness was simply too fast. His eyes couldn't track much more than a blur of black and slight violet. Middle Madness physical was 42, but it was clear that its speed was a heavy factor. If it hit him, everything suddenly came to a stop. A crumpled mess of flesh and blood fell to the ground. It squirmed about, trying to move more, but it seemed to truly be on its last legs. When Silas used the system, he confirmed that it was, indeed, Middle Madness. Silas had truly not expected things to end so easily. Little Madness had gone wild for a long while, but when he thought about it, the fragmented genes he got from Little Madness were all constitution-based. Obviously, Middle Madness constitution wasn't high enough to counter the speed it was running into the barrier with. I really was not meant to comprehend madness like I did. It finally sunk in for Silas. He had managed to grasp this comprehension by touching a barrier he wasn't supposed to be around in the first place. It was there to keep him from running, not for him to study. When he thought about how little madness, the skill, was just an inferior version of his madness comprehension, it sunk in even further. The barriers, I need to study them more. Unfortunately, after middle madness killed itself, the barrier vanished. You have slain middle madness. Floor 2 of slithering madness cleared. Rewards. Greater than middle madness skill. Greater than brittle gene elixir consumable. Greater than middle madness slayer title. The brittle gene elixir was a far better reward than his previous inflexible one. A brittle gene state had a 30% chance to absorb genes. As for middle madness, the skill. Middle madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a speed boost. This description made Silas pause for a moment. The description of little madness was near identical. The only exception was that it swapped speed with power. The realization that he wasn't meant to comprehend madness made Silas wonder. Could he use these skills without the side effects? Maybe. It was foolish of me to not even try. The wool of little madness was only 6, while the wool of middle madness was only 11. I assume they were able to use these skills without killing themselves like middle madness just did, so why can't I? Silas made the choice to try it out, starting out with little madness skill first. Using a skill felt odd. It was like something inside you was wiggling about on its own. That something should be his ether moving along paths he didn't quite comprehend, but the system did for him. And then it happened. Your understanding of less than little madness greater than has deepened, less than little madness greater than has reached common mastery. Your understanding of less than little madness greater than has deepened, less than little madness greater than has reached bronze mastery. Your understanding of less than little madness greater than has deepened, less than little madness greater than has reached silver mastery. Your understanding of less than little madness greater than has deepened, less than little madness greater than has reached gold mastery. Your understanding of less than little madness greater than has deepened, less than little madness greater than has reached legendary mastery. Title unlocked. Title, Skill Savant. You have displayed great familiarity with a skill. This skill has reached legendary status and has truly become your own. Plus 100% intelligence. Plus 50% success in absorbing related fragmented genes. Little madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your power. Plus 200% constitution. Plus 100% strength. Silas' eyes narrowed. After a moment, he took the plunge and repeated for middle madness. This time, he didn't receive another title. However, the boost was just as appealing otherwise. Your understanding of less than middle madness greater than has deepened, less than middle madness greater than has reached legendary mastery. Middle madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your speed. Plus 200% speed. Plus 100% dexterity. I can't make these sorts of oversights again, Silas thought to himself. Caution is fine. An overabundance of it will stifle me. This world is inherently one of danger now. Without risks, I will get nowhere. It was because he made the choice to dive into that lake that he was given this opportunity. He had to continue being just as bold, or else he would never close the gap between humans and the extinct creatures of Earth. He walked to middle madness, placing a hand on its mutilated corpse. Chapter 29, Theoretical Potential. Middle madness. Gene detected. Fragmented gene, 9, dexterity, F, common gene, 2, speed, F, attempt assimilation. Yes, no. Silas' eyes narrowed. Considering what had happened before, could he even succeed? This wasn't just one common gene, but 2. According to his original limit, he could only absorb 9 fragmented genes. How much had the Grimblade lineage increased his limit? Well, there was only one way to find out. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Gene successfully assimilated. Fragmented gene, 6, dexterity, F. Common gene, 2, speed, F. Genes failed assimilation. Fragmented gene, 3, dexterity, F. Silas' entire body seized. He only barely felt his patient stalker title activate before he was overwhelmed by everything else. It was so much more violent than the first time that he fell to the ground, a cold sweat pooling around his body. Some of the sweat even seemed to carry slight hints of a red, as though blood was being pulled right out of his pores. The process took several minutes, and yet for all his efforts, he was forced to look at a highly disappointing screen. Speed stat has reached 50 and cannot increase further. Species limit has been reached. Please evolve species, increase level, or change class to progress further. Name: Silas Grimblade. Species: Human, F. Affiliation: Grimblade lineage. Level: 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, Skill Savant, A Patient Stalker, Middle Madness Slayer, Dormant, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical: 21. Greater than Strength: 5. Greater than Constitution: 9. Greater than Dexterity: 19. Greater than Speed: 50. Mental: 11. Greater than Intelligence: 10. Greater than Wisdom: 10. Greater than Charisma: 12. Will: 36. Luck: 1. Skills: Mad and Meditation, F. Little Madness, F. Middle Madness, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State: Soft. Fragmented Genes: Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 4. Constitution, F. Common Genes: 3. Speed, F. Gene Talents: Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. This is a huge problem. If there was one thing Silas was good at, it was analyzing a situation and making the best possible decision in the shortest amount of time. At the very least, he tried his best to do so with the information he had on hand, though he was ultimately a human at the end of the day. However, this stat cap was even worse than the previous gene cap. This issue went back to the first and most important point: his stats were adjusted based on the dominant species of Earth. Because humans were the rulers of Earth, all stats in this 7th attempt would be adjusted to them. This essentially meant that, just because 50 was a high number, didn't mean that it was worth anything. It didn't even represent that he was 5 times faster than the fastest human either. The stats are based on a distribution curve where 10 stat points represented the 99th percentile of current humans. But even then, a single % of the population is still hundreds of millions of people. The weight of that stat isn't as heavy as it seems. If anything, this 50 number is far more meaningful than a 10. If it's referring to a limit of my genes, or the theoretical and physical limit of the human body, that should mean that 50 speed should represent around 50 miles per hour if the science is right. The fact that the same number should be purely coincidental. Unless the Grimblade lineage increased that limit for me, in which case, it's something higher than 50 miles per hour. Either way, Middle Madness was definitely faster than that. My eyes could hardly track it. But that shouldn't be its normal speed, it definitely had Middle Madness activated. I also have to take into account the fact the dungeons are weighted and adjusted to match the current population as well. If this was still the era of the dinosaurs, it would have still been a 50 physical entry recommendation, but that number would mean something far different to them. Silas' mind ran faster and faster, but the ultimate conclusion could be summed up in a few words. The human race had an uphill battle to fight, and an especially steep one at that. I need to find a way to increase this limit. It says leveling is a solution, but I should disregard that for as long as possible. Leveling should provide linear growth, but if my starting place is too low, each one of my levels will mean less and less. That leaves finding a class, changing my species, or, there seemed to be another option that the system didn't mention. But when Silas thought about it, it seemed to fall in line with evolving his species. The Grimblade lineage, it had helped increase his gene capacity. Wouldn't another gene of a similar kind also increase his stat limit? Comprehensions as well. That wasn't the only option available to Silas. Comprehensions seemed to be a great equalizer, skills as well. His stats said 50 was his limit, but Middle Madness could still increase that by 200% when it was activated. Clearly, ether was a huge factor in one's strength, and it could be maximized with the use of skills and comprehensions. If there was one advantage humans had over the creatures of old, it was their intelligence, not the stat, but rather in the traditional sense. However, it wasn't enough. In the end, those monstrous beasts, some standing at almost 20 meters tall, still lost in the end. If we want a chance to survive, some of us will need to go further than what these limits portray. Silas took a breath and calmed himself. With his high will, and his usual self-discipline, the ease with which he did so was only becoming greater. Next floor. Chapter 30, Balancing Stats. Silas appeared on a split road once again. The air here was particularly heavy. He didn't know if it was because his mind was enraptured by thoughts of finding a way to break the mold of these stat limits, or if it was just that the air was mixed in with something different here. Ether. Now that he thought about it, he had seen ether. He had even felt it work inside his body, but he had never really interacted with it in the normal sense. Before him, the same choice lay. This time, he actually hesitated, but in the end, he stuck with the same choice. Now wasn't the time to suddenly get cocky, nor should he let his worry about his stats cause him to overextend himself. He was hauling the python over his shoulder as he chose the forest once again, but he didn't make the same mistake he had last time. The moment the cobblestone path vanished, he dropped the python's corpse and sharpened himself, already activating madness. If this was another speed-focused floor, he might not be able to react fast enough this time. But nothing came. Silas slowly relaxed and retracted madness. Indeed, he had probably been a bit unlucky with an attack coming immediately on floor 2. But that didn't mean there weren't minions here as well. He chose to leave the python corpse behind, and middle madness corpse and the final fox carcass along with it. Then he carefully dove into the surrounding woods. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for. Big Madness Minion, F. Level, 0. Physical, 34. Mental, 4. Wool, 7. Hanging from a tree, a bright yellow python, about 3 meters long, hung. Silas spotted it before it saw him, but it didn't lag too far behind, baring its teeth the moment it spotted him. It lunged at Silas, but compared to Middle Madness and the Madness minions, it was too slow. Especially since Silas had gotten such a huge boost to his speed. The Big Madness minion missed, landing heavily on the ground with a much louder thud than Silas would have expected. Even so, it didn't slow his reaction. Silas activated less than Little Madness greater than. Since he felt relatively safe with the difference in speed, he thought that he should try to test the limits of his body. His plan was to use his fists and the antler blade he had and see if he could do some real damage with the help of the boost in his strength and constitution. But the moment he activated less than Little Madness greater than, it felt like his mind was being corrupted. It was instantaneous. A feeling of spiders and zombie-like hands fighting for pieces of his brain played in his thoughts. Silas immediately activated madness. He realized that without the support of his comprehension, this skill would really eat away at everything he was. It seemed that upgrading it to legendary mastery hadn't come without its drawbacks. Even so, he could control it. He dodged out of the way of a second lunge. He had been too delayed to complete his follow-up attack like he wanted, so this was his only choice. A fist wouldn't work anymore, so as the python flew by, he used the only attack that seemed possible. He flooded blade aura into his elbow, and swung down. The Big Madness minion came crashing down to the earth, looking slightly disoriented. But then the madness settled in and the wild movements began. The minion became a punching bag for Silas' experiment. Silas knew that his skill in actual combat was lacking. There was only so far that madness could take him, but there wasn't much he could do outside of try to battle more. However, he also wasn't strong enough to have a real head-to-head battle. Crack! Silas' antler blade finally gave way, and he was left with nothing more than his fists. He dodged the wildly flailing python, staying closer to it than he knew he should. There were more than a few close calls, but he managed to use Middle Madness to increase his speed just before he really suffered. He wasn't sure how much damage his fists were doing, and the dull ache was starting to become overwhelming. Should I really go back and get them? Attacking with his fists like this, even with the constitution bump to keep his hands from cracking like the antler had, and the strength to give him some added oomph, was probably even more foolish than using a snake's head as his primary weapon. At this point, it looked to be the smarter choice to just back up and get Middle Madness head. Or rather, what was left of it. He shook his head. Taking a sudden opportunity, he grabbed the tail of the wildly flailing beast. Using all his speed and strength, his core tightened, and he swung with all his might, cracking the head of the Big Madness minion against a tree trunk. Bang! It wasn't enough. In fact, the Big Madness minion continued to writhe as though nothing had happened. So he did it again. And then again. On the 5th iteration, the Big Madness minion finally twitched its last, leaving Silas gasping for breath. With both less than little madness greater than and less than middle madness greater than activated, the length of time he could sustain madness for seemed to have plummeted. Before, it was just over 5 minutes. But now, at around 2 minutes, he had already reached his limit. He sat down and activated Madden Meditation. 5 minutes later, he got up and touched the dead python. Big Madness Minion, F. Gene detected. Fragmented gene, 5, strength, F, attempt assimilation. Yes, no. Silas accepted, and his body seized up. Gene assimilation starting, gene assimilation triggered, gene successfully assimilated, fragmented gene, 3, strength, F, genes failed assimilation. Fragmented gene, 2, strength, F. This was good. Every strength stat that he received would count for double just purely because of less than little madness greater than and its 100% boost once activated. Maybe his fists could finally start doing some real damage. If my strength exceeds my constitution by too much, I could end up breaking my bones just attacking. I'll need to protect myself. Silas looked down at his bloody shirt. It seemed there really wasn't much of a choice. He was just wearing it out of habit now. Considering how raggedy it was, it could hardly be considered a shirt at all. Chapter 31, Reprimand. Silas methodically hunted down the Big Madness minions. He hadn't forgotten about studying the barrier, but he wanted to make sure that Floor 3 was cleared of everything but the boss first. So long as he was cautious, with the support of madness, his life was never truly in danger. Of course, it also helped that his speed was greater than these particular minions. Soon, he reached his genetic limit of 9 fragmented strength genes, and his Grimblade lineage kicked in again. Name, Silas Grimblade. Species, Human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, Skill Savant, A Patient Stalker, Middle Madness Slayer, Dormant, Little Madness Slayer, Dormant. Physical, 26. Greater than, Strength, 27. Greater than, Constitution, 9. Greater than, Dexterity, 19. Greater than, Speed, 50. Mental, 11. Greater than, Intelligence, 10. Greater than, Wisdom, 10. Greater than, Charisma, 12. Will, 36. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden Meditation, F, Little Madness, F, Middle Madness, F, Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F, 8, Dexterity, F, 4, Constitution, F, 2, Strength, F. Common Genes, 3, Speed, F, 1, Strength, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Silas needed to defeat 6 Madness minions to create a common speed gene. But he only needed to defeat 4 Big Madness minions to reach this point. It seemed that he could continue loading up his fragmented genes to make another common gene. So that was what he did. Unfortunately, he soon ran out of Big Madness minions and only managed to reach 9 fragmented strength genes, raising his strength to 34. At this strength, he was already beginning to feel some pain through his makeshift bandages, but they were still holding up better than he thought. The current Silas was shirtless, his original linen shirt having been carved up into thin slices that wrapped his knuckles, palms, and wrists. This covered all his bases for now. He could inflict a surprising amount of damage when he used his high speed in conjunction with his strength. He had realized long ago that these stats had a lot more to them than what was shown on the surface, so it wasn't surprising that the line between strength and speed could be blurred depending on action. It was especially easy to get used to these things when your opponents were all pretty much just live punching bags. It's time to check the barrier. Silas stood before the barrier. This coming boss likely won't end up killing itself while it's rampaging. If the pattern of the previous floors is followed, this is likely to be a strength-based boss, and its constitution won't lag too far behind. If I want to beat it, I'll have to be the one that does the damage. But Silas looked down at his fists. The blood-covered rags that coated them looked quite fierce, but they lacked a real punch. The boss's strength would probably be around 80 to 100, somewhere in that ballpark. Its constitution will probably be its second highest stat at around 50, leaving it with speed and dexterity around 20 to 30. These were just estimations Silas had made based on the previous boss matchups, as well as the minion fight. He had already checked the BOSS, and its physical was 50 on the dot, just like he expected. That meant it had 200 total stats to spread between strength, constitution, dexterity, and speed. So that was what Silas had based his assumptions on. These estimations were probably similar for Middle Madness, just with strength and dexterity as its main physical stats and a lower overall physical. This was why its speed had overwhelmed its constitution. Obviously, that wouldn't work this time around. If worse comes to worst, I'll hope to force its heart to give out like that Madness minion. But it'll be hard. That boss also happened to have a will that was much higher than Middle Madness had been. Silas touched the barrier. Flashing forms of moving snakes occupied his mind again. This time, he basked in it, not cutting it off for the sake of battle. Maddened meditation activated naturally as he was enraptured by the movement. He remembered what happened the first time he really looked at these images. He felt like there was a disconnect between what was happening and the actions he could copy. They had the bodies of snakes and he, obviously, had the body of a human. How could he imitate them? Did he want to imitate them? A third of the images were clearly images of snakes mating, their tails intertwining and their minds sunken into the throes of passion. It was usually very difficult to read the expressions of animals, their actions themselves were better tells of what they were feeling. But for some reason, it felt so clear to him. Was he meant to have a partner to complete this ritual of sorts? Silas didn't know how he felt about that. This madness was very important to him, but he didn't want to find a partner just because it would make him more powerful. Plus, he was a virgin. Was he supposed to casually give that up as well? What was his virginity to the plight of Earth, though? Silas found himself laughing at himself, something he rarely seemed to do. The only one who could make him smile was that little munchkin of a sister of his. She was always so amusing in her own quirky ways. Being a 26-year-old virgin was definitely something she would make fun of him for. If she really knew what that meant, that is. Well, she's 13 years old already. Who knows what those snotty-nosed kids are corrupting my little sister with? Silas shook his head in lament. Kids these days. It wasn't as though he needed help in that department, anyway. He was a decently attractive man, successful, tall. Then again, he did still live at home by choice. That wasn't exactly a nice opener. He also liked to walk everywhere and didn't have his own car. He also focused on work. A lot. You'd think it was Kasari reprimanding me again. Chapter 32, Kasari. Silas actually chuckled again. There was, indeed, someone else that used to make him smile. Though he never really laughed around her. He wasn't as comfortable with her as he was with his little sister, which was funny considering he had known her for longer than Alara had been alive. Kasari was an ex of his. Well, can she really be considered that? Kasari was more like a childhood friend than an ex. They had dated for 2 months when they were 17 years old. Hadn't ended on bad terms. He thought, anyway. But after that, they went from close friends to never talking. It had already been almost a decade since then, and he hadn't even thought to contact her about this summoned Ascension matter. Would she even believe me? Ellipsis. Hey, Kasari, it's Silas, your high school boyfriend of 2 months. The world is ending soon, so you should probably prep for that. Silas laughed at his own joke. That was already 3 times in just a few minutes. It felt weird. He hadn't laughed like this in a while. It was a shame, though. The girlfriends he had after Kasari all pretty much ended the same. Fizzled out with no real drama. Though it was hard to tell if that was because he was always so stoic about things or not. Well, women probably prefer funnier men. If I was going to sell my body for power, maybe I should go for a more stoic woman like me. Silas shook his head again, almost immediately. He had tried that before with a certain Clarice. Who knew, maybe he had a thing for women with C's in the names. That breakup could be considered to be his most dramatic, meaning not really at all. She was the kind of woman to make lists about everything, but he could respect that. Which was funny, again, because he had critiqued her list of reasons to break up with him. It wasn't as a ploy to keep her by his side or anything. He was a prideful man, and if a woman didn't want him, he wouldn't chase after her needlessly. You couldn't make a person change their mind if they didn't want to. Instead, it was because he had found the list truly ridiculous. His reply was that she could have summarized it in one sentence. "You're not ambitious enough for me." That was pretty much the gist of it. A 26-year-old tenured professor at the most prestigious college in the country wasn't good enough for her. In her defense, he wasn't tenured just yet back then. That, and, she's probably not wrong, though, Silas agreed. Like he had said before, he had only casually chosen his doctorate, and it was taken in a field that was very unnecessary. No one needed venom vaccines. He only really worked on things that interested him, and much like his parents, when it was time for him to check out of work, he never brought it home. It could be said that he was curious about a lot of things, but not really passionate about anything. Clarice had picked up on that and felt like he was wasting his potential. He didn't really have a goal for after securing tenure. Truthfully, he would have probably floated about until he found something else that interested him. She's still not tenured yet, though. A rare snide comment flew by his thoughts. It surprised him because he felt that he was pretty much over that breakup. Actually, he thought he got over it the day of. Silas sighed. The world had just felt boring. How could he be ambitious about anything when there didn't seem to be a point? Was it for money? His parents were already successful and he could live off their wealth for the rest of his days without a care. Why should he strive for more money when he had more than enough? He found comfort in the little things. He loved his family. He liked running, walking, hiking, and keeping himself in shape. He liked giving his life discipline and structure. He would probably like to find a wife to share his life with, but he didn't want to settle for any random woman, either. He wanted a relationship like his parents had. One that was built on mutual respect, mutual competence, mutual love. In this day and age. Fat chance. Silas suddenly chuckled again before his mind suddenly snapped back into focus. He blinked in a bit of a daze. Had he fallen into a trance again? He had ended up thinking about himself more than the barrier. What about of déjà vu? Subconsciously, he checked his notifications. There were only 2 lines. Your understanding of less than madden meditation greater than has deepened, less than madden meditation greater than has reached common mastery, your comprehension of madness has deepened, madness has reached common mastery. You have comprehended the madness. +10 will. +20 charisma. Madness, F. The madness consumes you, but does not control you. Instead, it becomes your tool to both control yourself and others. You, while steeped in madness, maintain your wits about you. Your enemies, though, are not so lucky. +200% charisma. +150% will. Name, Silas Grimblade. Species, human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, a flexible will, skill savant, a patient stalker, middle madness slayer, dormant, little madness slayer, dormant. Physical, 28. Greater than, strength, 34. Greater than, constitution, 9. Greater than, dexterity, 19. Greater than, speed, 50. Mental, 14. Greater than, intelligence, 10. Greater than, wisdom, 10. Greater than, charisma, 22. Will, 44. Luck, 1. Skills, madden meditation, F, little madness, F, middle madness, F, comprehensions, madness, F. Gene state, soft. Fragmented genes, Grimblade lineage, F, 8, dexterity, F, 4, constitution, F, 9, strength, F. Common genes, 3, speed, F, 1, strength, F. Gene talents, blade aura, mutated weakened, sudden burst, dormant, F. Chapter 33, Fangs. It seems that the additions to my will and charisma aren't on top of the previous additions, but rather update. My will only increased by 7, and my charisma only by 10. There seems to be a purposeful imbalance between charisma and will. If not for a flexible will, title, charisma would have already long surpassed it. But if it continues at this pace, it's inevitable. Ellipsis. Silas appeared by the side of a tree, looking deeply at the boss that lay in the clearing across from him. It was a gargantuan creature, with a body at least 10 meters long and covered in fierce red scales. It slumbered much like the others had before it, and yet its slow breath seemed to make the ground unsteady. Big madness, F. Level, 0. Physical, 50. Mental, 8. Will, 22. Silas walked in, gripping one empty fist and a sack weaved of leaves and vines. Madness. Big Madness stirred awake just as Silas' domain of sorts descended. However, unlike the others, it really looked at him. As its yellow slit eyes slowly became redder, it truly looked as though it wanted to burn Silas' image into its mind. It opened its maw and unleashed a roar. Silas had never met the dinosaurs, but he assumed that if a raptor wanted to unleash a call to nature, it would sound exactly like this. It was a grating sound, one that made goosebumps jump across his skin and his bones grow cold. Then it lunged at him in a maddened charge. Silas had no idea what threshold Big Madness had managed to reach, but unlike the others that thrashed about wildly, it seemed to be able to focus its irrational tirade on him. Without a choice, Silas could only quickly dodge out of the way, using his own speed while he maintained his focus. He had yet to activate less than little madness greater than, and he didn't need to. However, he was quickly becoming aware of just how large Big Madness was and how small the clearing was in return. There was only about 30 meters of diameter and they were surrounded by a ring of trees and the barrier. But Big Madness was already over 10 meters long. Even though it was slow, the space it covered was so vast that Silas was never truly out of danger for any longer than a few seconds. This isn't good. A useless thought flew through his mind. In the sack in his hand, he had gathered as many minion fangs as he could. It sounded like a good plan, but with this enraged beast looming over him, it truly felt inadequate. Still, Silas reached into the sack, but the action slowed him down, almost allowing Big Madness' tail to smash his head to pieces. If nearly 100 strength, matched with that weight, collided with his head. Weight. No, strength should be a function of their weight. It shouldn't count more or the adjusted stats would be meaningless, which means that the attack speed of this creature will be highly limited. A roar interrupted his thoughts. Silas forgot about picking out the fangs one by one. With a pull, he unsealed the bag and everything came spilling out. 2 potions and a collection of fangs pulled onto the ground. It seemed that he had made a mistake, but he didn't panic at all as Big Madness spun around and charged at him, leaving deep gashes in the grass as it slithered forward. Silas pulled with his intention and a fang was magically pulled off the ground, suddenly zipping through the air and right into Big Madness' right eye. Big Madness whipped its head wildly from side to side, the sudden spike of pain pulling it out of its maddened pursuit. For a moment, it seemed to have almost entirely lost its mind, much like the previous bosses. It can actually feel the pain. Silas realized that it wasn't entirely bad that the python was conscious. He ducked and rolled to the side, diving over a whipping tail and barely dodging it on its way back with another leap. His intention pulled at the ground again just as Big Madness managed to regain control over itself. Unfortunately for it, slowing down was the last thing it should have done, as its remaining good eye was ripped through by yet another fang. Silas thanked his lucky stars that these dungeon creatures had deviated from the path of normal pythons, or else it was impossible for them to be so effective. Well, that and his charisma increasing to the point he could impose so much more of his will on the world. Unable to see, the agitation of Big Madness grew to the point it couldn't control itself anymore. It slowly sunk into the madness as Silas quickly dodged out of its way. I can't just use this opportunity to attack it. I'll break my hand. What do I do? There was a good chance that Big Madness might tire itself out, but the fact it had been able to maintain control of itself, and even regain control at one point, put Silas on edge. Snakes were known for the poor vision to begin with, Silas knew this. If it managed to calm down, it could use its sense of smell to track him down. I'll have to cut off its tongue just to be sure. Silas pulled at another fang from the ground. Timing it right, he sent it flying into the mouth of the python just as it roared. This time, he moved 3 at one time, lodging them in one after another. Fangs have good piercing power, but cutting. Silas burst into action, less than middle madness greater than activating. His speed tripled and his dexterity doubled. In his own act of madness, he suddenly gripped the flickering tongue of Big Madness just as it whipped its head to the side. Chapter 34, Madness Key. He held on strong, activating less than little madness greater than and pulling with his doubled strength. At that moment, his raw power was truly great. A howl of pain was preceded by a spurt of blood. Silas already had his escape plan prepared, ducking and rolling again to get out of the way. He tossed the bloodied tongue to the side, his green irises exuding a chilly light. It wasn't killing intent, but rather sheer focus. He slowly dismantled the boss creature, cutting at its weaknesses one by one until it was just a shell of itself. It was completely disoriented, unable to make its way in the world any longer. Silas controlled 2 more fangs, driving them right up Big Madness' flaring nostrils. Like this, the python not only lost the ability to see or smell, but had also lost the ability to breathe with any sort of ease. That was when Silas sent in a second pair of fangs into its nostrils, and then a third pair. He would have sent another, but he ran out. Even so, it didn't seem to matter. Lacking sensory perception, and now having lost the ability to breathe normally, Big Madness began to keep its mouth open. Mouth breathing was the only option it had left to it, but the pooling blood that came from its torn-off tongue was making it a nightmare. It was too busy rampaging to slow down, and the accumulation of lost breath from its nose, and the fact blood was pooling into its lungs now with every haggard breath, was slowing it down further and further. Silas whittled the creature down step by step. It was an almost methodical slaughter. Compared to how he had been when he first entered the dungeon, this was on another level. This was the Silas Brown he preferred to be. In the madness, he felt he understood himself better. You have slayed Big Madness. Floor 3 of Slithering Madness cleared. You have cleared Slithering Madness Dungeon, F. Rewards. Greater than Big Madness, Skill. Greater than Soft Gene Elixir, Consumable. Greater than Big Madness Slayer, Title. Greater than Madness Key, 1/2 Treasure. Madness Key. Silas had basically expected the other things, but this caught him off guard. Especially the fact that it only seemed to be one of a set of 2. An elixir bottle and a key fell into his hands. The latter was shaped like a very ancient key, one forged of heavy metal and had quite some thickness to it. However, it was flat on one side, while its head was formed of a maze of peaks and valleys that likewise only looked half complete. If there was another half, it would slide into the maze quite perfectly, Silas could imagine. Was the other key in the other paths? But it said the dungeon was complete. Do I have to find the other key elsewhere? Or can the dungeon be completed more than once, maybe? Silas looked toward the other rewards. Big Madness, Skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a strength boost. Silas nodded to himself. That seemed to be why less than little madness greater than used the word power. It focused more on constitution, though there was a great strength boost as well. He activated less than Big Madness greater than and a familiar pattern repeated itself. Your understanding of less than Big Madness greater than has deepened, less than Big Madness greater than has reached legendary mastery, Big Madness, Skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however, it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your strength. Plus 300% strength. That much strength, that's a 4 times multiplier. But what if less than little madness greater than and less than Big Madness greater than were activated at the same time? Would the plus 300% be added to the base number or the already plus 100% of less than little madness greater than? Silas soon got his answer, and it was quite disappointing. When he activated both skills at once, or rather tried to, he was forced to immediately stop. It wasn't because something had stopped him, but rather because he felt that the paths the ether in his body were trying to take were about to clash. If he continued, he might have even ended up killing himself. He didn't know what it would mean for ether to explode inside of you, but it didn't take a genius to know it wouldn't be good. Maybe if his constitution was higher, he could take the risk. But for now, activating both would be a death sentence. But would it even be possible for my body to withstand a 4 times multiplier to my strength stat without the support of higher constitution? Until now, the skills hadn't really made Silas feel uncomfortable. It was probably because the power came from ether, rather than increasing what his body itself was capable of. But even if that was the case, if he tried to use this added strength to make contact with something, he could really hurt himself. He looked down at his hands. He really needed a weapon. Or. His gaze landed on Big Madness' corpse. He closed the distance with a few steps and placed a hand on it. Big Madness. Gene detected. Common gene, 4, strength, F, 3, constitution, F, attempt assimilation. Yes, no. Silas braced himself, remembering the horrid pain it took to assimilate common genes. He found something to bite onto and then moved his intention toward yes. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Genes successfully assimilated. Common gene, 1, strength, F, 2, constitution, F, genes failed assimilation. Common gene, 3, strength, F, 1, constitution, F. A deep grunt left Silla's lips, his fingers digging into the ground. The nails he had lost on his right hand still hadn't recovered, and yet he didn't even seem to notice as he dug deeper and deeper, biting down on the piece of his pants hard. It took several minutes before he finally collapsed in what felt like a pool of his sweat. He barely registered a familiar disappointing message. Strength stat has reached 50 and cannot increase further. Species limit has been reached. Please evolve species, increase level, or change class to progress further. Chapter 35, Scorned Raps. Name, Silas Grimblade, species, human, F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage, level, 0. Titles, a flexible will, skill savant, a patient stalker, big madness slayer, dormant, middle madness slayer, dormant, little madness slayer, dormant. Physical, 42. Greater than, strength, 50. Greater than, constitution, 49. Greater than, dexterity, 19. Greater than, speed, 50. Mental, 14. Greater than, intelligence, 10. Greater than, wisdom, 10. Greater than, charisma, 22. Will, 44. Luck, 1. Skills, Madden meditation, F, little madness, F, middle madness, F, big madness, F. Comprehensions, madness, F. Gene state, soft. Fragmented genes, Grimblade lineage, F, 8, dexterity, F, 4, constitution, F, 9, strength, F. Common genes, 3, speed, F, 2, strength, F, 2, constitution, F. Gene talents, blade aura, mutated weakened, sudden burst, dormant, F. Although he knew he couldn't put too much stock in these numbers, Silas still felt a childish sort of satisfaction watching them go up. The fact he had to suffer so much through the assimilation of those genes only made it more satisfying. However, these stats were just a means to an end. Hadn't he defeated all of these bosses despite the fact his stats were lacking compared to theirs? Granted, that was because of his madness comprehension, but a part of him still believed there were many factors this system couldn't take into account. Even so, I need to find a way to break these limiters. What if my will caps at 50 as well? Wouldn't that make madness useless against more powerful targets? He still hadn't forgotten that Big Madness managed to shrug off his influence somewhat, and that was after his madness had reached common mastery. When madness was activated now, his will was over 100 thanks to the 150% boost. But a creature with a will of just 22 managed to maintain some clarity. There was obviously a bottleneck somewhere here that he wasn't aware of. Or maybe I've misunderstood madness. Every time he deepened his comprehension of madness, at least the 2 times he had, it seemed to require a lot of self-reflection. If the point of madness was to drive others crazy, wouldn't his comprehension path have to be more general? Now that he thought about it, activating madness also gave him a keen sense of self that was arguably stronger than the influence he had on other creatures. His stats didn't increase, but they seemed to mean more, in a weird way, as though he could maximize every inch of them. Then there were those telekinetic abilities he had gained. That was also a process of his own will taking form rather than his just playing with the mind of an enemy. If that's the case, it makes sense. My ability to influence the minds of others isn't scaling because that isn't the point of the comprehension at all. At least, it's not the main point. Silas wasn't sure if this was right, but his gut was telling him that he was onto something. Taking a breath, he exhaled slowly. He would have to explore this more. Without the barriers to study, he had lost his shortcut, though, so he would have to find another way or just take it one step at a time. Unless. He looked around. Between the various python corpses he had accumulated along the way, he had too many things to carry and yet no way of conveniently doing so. Once he left this dungeon, he'd be stuck in the middle of the lake, and he would only have a short time to escape. Those animals that had been slumbering and in the midst of their evolution should have also long since woken up. Simply put, he couldn't just carry hundreds of kilograms worth of snakes around with him no matter how great his strength had become. Without a choice, he kept only Middle Madness' mutilated corpse with him and was ready to leave when the screen appeared, sensing his intention. You have cleared Slithering Madness Dungeon, F. Leave now. Yes, no. Silas paused. After some thought, his intention moved toward no, just to see what would happen. Your madness is commendable. The screen glitched for a moment before it came back into sharp focus. What was that? Silas frowned. The so-called screen was just a projection of his mind, so how could it glitch? A hint of worry sprouted in his chest. This dungeon had messed with his mind a lot. Even during his comprehension sessions, he had done a lot of thinking about things that hadn't even come to mind in years. It was too weird. Slithering Madness Dungeon, F. Level maximum, 0. Recommended, 100 physical. Description: lurking in the depths, high in the trees and on the forest floors, they are natural predators, unfettered and unbothered. So scorned by the skies, they've been restricted to a life of crawling on their bellies. But the day to fall again is not far off. Silas' memory was excellent, and it could be said to be doubly so when his attention was focused on every detail. He knew that in a world like this, even the slightest mistake could cost him his life, so he directly glossed over the fact the recommended physical had doubled. That wasn't the problem. But the day to fall again is not far off. That definitely read, rise, before, not, fall. And scorned is capitalized now. What does that change mean? Your madness has been rewarded. Greater than scorned wrapped treasure. Scorned wrapped treasure. A cursed treasure scorned by the skies themselves. In its presence, your body cannot be adorned by armor, and your hands cannot be graced by weapons. The madness is relentless and its fury scorns the world in return. Curse status, cannot be unequipped. Plus 10% constitution to fists. Right then, a pair of what looked like long, dirty cloths appeared in the skies, slithering down toward Silas, almost like snakes themselves. It seemed like they had once been a pristine and shimmering white, but were worn by dirt and dried blood over countless years of hardship and toil. Silas couldn't avoid them even if he tried. Chapter 37, the same. The wrap he had used to brace his wrists and fists, made of his own shirt, burnt to ash the moment the scorned wraps touched them. He couldn't even register the pain as the cursed treasure tightly wound itself around his fists, wrists, and a portion of his forearm. Silas was silent all the while. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but he was smart enough to know that it was unavoidable at this point. What a weird way to use, adorned, and graced. It's as though it takes the usage of armor and weapon as the actions of the prim and proper, rather than that of a real warrior. Silas looked down at his fists. Did he feel that way too? Absolutely not. His vision blurred, and he found himself on a forked road once again. However, this time, there was only one choice. The cobblestone path leading into what looked like an ancient ruin or city of sorts. Silas wasn't sure about the situation ahead, so he tested a few things on this outer road. When he was satisfied, and feeling as good as he probably could in such a short time, he picked up his things and the various python carcasses before moving forward. Luckily, with his current strength, although there was a clear burden, it wasn't as exceptional as it had been in the past. As he moved, his thoughts spun, these changes feeling quite heavy. These stats are all relative, so does that mean that 50 would always be the limit regardless of race? If that's the case, then the first iteration of this dungeon was meant to be entered by someone who had reached the limit. In that case, this second hidden portion of the dungeon is supposed to be passed by someone with double those stats, far beyond those limits. As a level 0. Madness indeed. However, Silas felt a level of confidence he hadn't felt when he first entered the dungeon, and that was for no other reason than his comprehension. He had a feeling that it would be of great help here as well. What Silas didn't expect was that he wouldn't run into a swarm of enemies, or even some dangerous situation of sorts. As the cobblestone road to his back faded, a ruin that reminded him of the Stonehenge appeared before him. The main difference was that these tall stones were more irregularly shaped, curving and looping into one another as though dancing. Silas didn't know why he got that feeling, because they were obviously static objects. But it was as though something was pulling at him. Silas frowned, clearing his mind. This felt like a weaker version of what the barriers had tried to pull him into, much weaker. When he looked around, he found there was no entrance, no exit. The area was barely 30 or so meters from edge to edge and he could see every inch of it clearly. But there were no obvious enemies or targets. What's the point of this? He would have already felt hints of panic if he didn't understand that there had to be a way out. There was a small, existential part of him that worried that the glitch from earlier might have applied to the whole dungeon, effectively trapping him in here forever. But he still felt that that shouldn't be the case. He put the corpses he was lugging around down and began to walk around more earnestly. Why would I need 100 physical for this? What's going on? He began to observe the curving stones more closely and found that there were grain-like patterns within them, so faded that in the somewhat somber lighting, it was hard to pick up until he looked closely. Once again, they reminded him of those snakes. Some roaring, some mating, some in battle. He touched it and felt a spark jolt through his body, but it ultimately didn't feel like much. It was like he had rubbed his feet one too many times on some carpet and then touched a doorknob, but it wasn't anything more substantial than that. Dash. Floor 1 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Greater than Little Madness skill. Dash. Scylla's brows shot up. Floor cleared. How? He hadn't done anything. And also, wasn't the recommended physical 100? Shouldn't the rewards be even better, then? Why was he getting the same reward he had already gotten the first time around? Is it the same? The shade of the color is a little bit darker. Silas kept feeling that there was a lot the system was holding back on him. Titles didn't receive grades for some reason, some of them were even dormant without any clear reason. And yet, there was very clearly a pecking order. When he got a new gene, it just took its place at the end. But he had gotten a Patient Stalker first, and it was third amongst his titles, while Skill Savant was something he had awakened after a Flexible Will, but it was second. It seemed that there was a hidden hierarchy he could only vaguely get a peek at through the relative order between his titles. But was a Flexible Will really the strongest? It only gave him a flat +10 to his will and a 10% boost. Was that really better than a pure +100% to his intelligence like Skill Savant gave him? The latter seemed far better. This was just one of the many issues Silas had with the system. It ran more like a poorly coded program than something the lives of real people were riding on. But he was even more frustrated with it now than he had been before because the confusing circumstances just seemed to be piling up. Dash. Little Madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone. Exchange your sanity for a power boost. Dash. Once again, the same description. The only change was that sanity and power were capitalized for an inexplicable reason. Chapter 38, It Didn't. Silas shook his head. It was good that he had passed the first floor so easily. What wasn't so good was that he didn't like not understanding why. It was possible that whatever he used to easily pass this round could come back to bite him heavily in the next rounds. But it didn't. Floor 2 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Greater than Middle Madness skill. Silas stood in the middle of Floor 2, stumped once again. The tingling sensation on this floor was a little stronger, but he shrugged it off just as easily. The floor itself was practically identical. The only difference was that the faded images on the stones were far clearer and he could see them even from a distance now. Comprehension. That's the only explanation. Maybe there was a path to comprehending madness in this dungeon, but because he had done so unconventionally, he took something that should have been a challenge and shrugged it off. Thinking about it now, what if he had chosen this path first? Maybe he would have still comprehended madness, but then, when he got to the end, wouldn't that mean he would have to face a 100 physical big madness when he went through the dungeon a second time? Silas didn't know if he was lucky or unlucky. On the one hand, he didn't have to face off against truly monstrous creatures. But on the other hand, how many more genes would have been available if he managed to defeat a little, middle, and big madness that were twice as powerful? He managed to shake himself free of those angsty thoughts, though. Setting aside whether his madness alone would have been enough to deal with them after even the weaker big madness managed to keep its wits under his influence, none of that would change his stat cap. Silas stepped onto the third floor. This time, there was a substantial change. The drawings felt alive and looked as though they had been painted into existence by a large amount of blood. The more Silas stared at them, the more real they felt until they suddenly began to move. It was so much clearer than the barriers. They didn't fade in and out depending on his touch, but were really there, living and breathing. He no longer saw it as a series of separate actions, but rather a cohesive whole, and it seemed to embody passion in 3 different forms. Passion you were willing to put your life on the line for. Passion of love and affection. Passion of raw emotion, not necessarily love, but happiness, anger, even arrogance. Floor 3 of Slithering Madness cleared. Rewards. Greater than Big Madness, skill. Greater than Madness key, 2 halves, treasure. Greater than Common Gene Crystal, treasure. Greater than Void, title. Greater than Void, skill. The list was mostly confusing. He wasn't sure what 3 of the 5 items were, and by the chosen words, Void, it seemed the system didn't really understand either. But quite quickly, both Void rewards took effect on their own. Title, Void, has taken effect. Big Madness Slayer, Middle Madness Slayer, and Little Madness Slayer have been fused. Title unlocked. Title, Madness Conqueror. The madness does not sway you, instead it fuels you. You have conquered the madness. Plus 50 will. Plus 100 charisma. Plus 10% success in absorbing all genes. Scylla's brows raised. Until now, whenever he got a boost to gene assimilation by any one of his titles, they always specified fragmented genes. But this clearly did the exact opposite of that. He braced himself to hear the familiar chime of his stats having reached their cap, but instead, his world actually went white. When Scylla's vision cleared, he found himself gasping for breath on the ground. Something wet was on the side of his face, and when he reached for it, he was shocked to find that it was a striking shade of red. I'm bleeding from my ears. It couldn't be a coincidence. Will and charisma seemed to have both to do with his mind, and now he was bleeding from his ears. Had he ruptured something? Were his eyes bleeding too? How was his brain actually doing? It wasn't until several seconds later that Scylla realized he was thinking just fine and there wasn't the expected fogginess in his mind. Instead, he felt unprecedented clarity. Skill, Void, has taken effect. Less than Big Madness greater than, less than Middle Madness greater than, and less than Little Madness greater than have been fused. Madness Control, skill. Your body is your temple, and it listens to no commands other than your own. Plus dexterity. That was it. There was no number, no percentage, it just said plus dexterity as though that was supposed to mean something to Scylla. Subconsciously, Scylla tried activating the skill, half expecting it to rocket up to legendary mastery just like the others had. But instead, everything seemed to slow down around him. When he looked down at his hands, he could seem to see afterimages being left in the air as though he was watching still frames of himself rather than true fluid movement. And then it stopped. He felt an emptiness in the pit of his stomach, and at some unknown point in time, he had already gotten up from the ground and walked around the entire region before returning to his original spot. I ran out of ether. The weird part was that Scylla could usually guesstimate how much time had passed while he was out of it, but this time there was nothing. His sense of time had been too distorted just now, and it felt like hours had passed at least, but he knew that was impossible. He wasn't foolish enough to think that this skill gave him control over time. Rather, it gave him such a high level of control over his body that it made whatever his dexterity stat was meaningless. Maybe that was why there was no number attached to it. This skill could raise his dexterity to whatever it needed to be for him to unearth his full potential and then some. Chapter 39, Gene Crystal. This must be what his grandfather meant by, not all skills were created equal. He had just lost 3 legendary mastery skills, and he didn't even know if he should miss them at all. That didn't even mention the fact less than Madness Control greater than wasn't even at common mastery yet. Scylla turned his attention to the final 2 rewards. Common Gene Crystal, F Treasure. One's genetic code is a universe within the universe. Endless and vast, the number of meandering paths it can take are uncountable. Use this common gene crystal and begin to forge your own path. Capacity, 50. Capacity of 50. Forge your own path. Suddenly, the answer hit Scylla like a bolt of lightning, and he understood. Until now, no matter what kind of beast he killed, he always received genes of the same kind, one of the 4 basic physical stats. Could it be that this gene crystal allowed him to take those genes and combine them into something like the Grimblade lineage? And since it had the prefix of common, the capacity should refer to 50 common genes, then. Silla's eyes narrowed. He felt that his guesses were pretty close to the mark, but what of it? What could he do with this information? Did he just have to randomly pour genes in and hope it popped out something good? And could he use it more than once? The description didn't seem to say anything about a limit to how many times he could use it. So did that mean he could experiment? He needed more information, but there was just far too little. He could only turn toward the final item, hoping that it would give him something to bet on. With slow movements, he brought the two halves of the madness key together, but he couldn't even take action before they snapped forward, forming a loop of twine around their handles and wrapping around his neck. Madness key, treasure. A key leading to a fortune of madness. Detects other madness disciples and enlightens your path. Contains small spatial world within. Can answer one question in exchange for less than one fragmented greater than gene. Curse status, glutton. Less than one common greater than gene a day to maintain happiness. Requirements grow by the day. Less than 7 days greater than remaining until hunger increases. Curse status, cannot be unequipped. Silla's mind was entirely occupied by a single line. Can answer one question in exchange for less than one fragmented greater than gene. He didn't care about the cost, he didn't care about the glutton curse, he didn't even care about the so-called madness disciples, or how this item somehow had a hidden space within it. When he saw this one line, he actually gripped his fists in excitement, showing more emotion than he was used to. It seemed that the madness had its positive effects as well. But the moment the excitement faded, the flood of questions came. How much did it know? How broad could he make the question? How specific were the answers? What was the best way to test this without wasting a flood of genes? The more he thought, the more niche the questions became. Did the genes have to come from him directly? Or could he use the key to absorb genes instead? And if he used the madness key to absorb genes directly from a corpse, what gene state would it have? Could it absorb all the genes? Or would it be weaker than his soft gene state in this regard? Should he test it with questions he knew the answer to first? And if all questions were worth the same regardless of what they were, should he try to front-load as many of them as he could now, even if it was at a short-term detriment to his overall stats? If in 7 days' time the cost of a question rose to 2 fragmented genes, wouldn't he regret not doing so? Or worse yet, what if it immediately jumped to a common gene? There was no telling how badly the hunger would kick it up. He had so many burning questions and ideas on how to best optimize this madness key that he felt his mind might explode. Eventually, he calmed himself down. Without a calm mind, he would only end up harming himself. This matter also helped to put a great deal into perspective. He was nearing his 3rd day in this world, and yet it was already messing with his mind so much. He should have been able to take this in stride, but he felt real excitement at seeing this treasure. It wasn't just that, either. The feeling of satisfaction he had watching his stats grow was somewhat addicting as well. It was like this world wanted you to get addicted to improvement. To evolving. Silas picked up the key that hung around his neck. As expected, some mysterious and invisible force stopped him from taking it off. He looked around, probing for the so-called space within, but he didn't find anything until he thought of using his intention to open it like he did when he interacted with the system. Once he did, a world was opened up to him. Well, calling it a world was a bit much, but it was actually quite roomy. It was a 2x2x2 bland grey space. Fascinating. This was the only word Silas could use to describe it. He tried putting the common gene crystal in and it vanished. He pulled it out, then put it back in again, getting used to the sensation. This space would definitely make things more convenient, but it seemed that he wouldn't likely be able to use it in the middle of battle. Doing so required focusing his will on it and then using his charisma to force the change he wanted, and much like the system notifications, it would envelop his line of sight. The difference was that the notifications didn't obstruct a lot of the rest of the world, while focusing on this inner space replaced everything in his eyesight. Chapter 40, Become Strong. Castle bonus, big thanks to Readable and Relay Salt. 1/10. Silas put the crystal, the 3 potions he had gathered, and a few pieces of beast meat within. He didn't want to waste so much space on big madness, so he didn't even try to take it in. How am I supposed to dissect corpses now that I can't equip weapons? Silas shook his head, looking at the scorned wraps. An idea came to his mind. No, It said I can't use them in my hands, but it didn't say anything about my charisma. He threw that idea to the back of his mind. Even if he had this thought, he had lost anything he could call a weapon in this dungeon. Silas thought about leaving now, but then he shook his head. This dungeon never seemed to rush him. It hadn't hurried him forward through the floors, and he could always decide when it was that he wanted to move on. In that case, this might be the safest area he would have for a while. He should at least try to get a baseline understanding of how the madness key worked. Name: Silas Grimblade. Species: Human, F. Affiliation: Grimblade lineage, level 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, Madness Conqueror, Skill Savant, A Patient Stalker. Physical: 42. Greater than Strength, 50. Greater than Constitution, 49. Greater than Dexterity, 19. Greater than Speed, 50. Mental, 47. Greater than Intelligence, 10. Greater than Wisdom, 10. Greater than Charisma, 122. Will, 94. Luck, 1. Skills: Madden Meditation, F. Madness Control, F. Comprehensions, Madness, F. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F8, Dexterity, F4, Constitution, F9, Strength, F. Common Genes, 3, Speed, F2, Strength, F2, Constitution, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, Mutated Weakened, Sudden Burst, Dormant, F. Looking at his stat screen, Silas decided that the best gene to use would probably be Strength. He had a buffer of 4 fragmented strength genes that were lying dormant right now due to having reached his genetic limit. He wanted to test the waters, but he also didn't want to waste his genes either. A dungeon was ultimately a controlled environment. There was no telling how much harder it would be to gather these genes on the outside, so he had to be frugal. Let's pick a question that's been bugging me. It should be difficult enough, not too broad, but not too narrow either. Let's see. How does this work? Silas touched the key, and once again used his intention. He focused on his fragmented strength gene before he asked his question. As for the common gene that he needed to give up every day to keep it happy, the treasure hadn't said anything about it, so he assumed he had a buffer period. Why does the system feel incomplete? Silas was quite used to using search engines, as he had spent most of his life in academia. This question was, objectively, a horrible one to type in. His word choice wasn't too specific, and it was mostly driven by his intention. In addition, the word feel was too broad as well. However, when given the context of this world, it should be something that an intelligent listener should be able to grasp. He felt a pulse from the madness key and a flickering image appeared before his eyes. Why does the system feel incomplete? The system is an intelligence forged by the universe, an evolutionary convergence to aid ascending worlds. However, the information the universe can decipher, versus what lesser creatures can decipher, is separated by a vast chasm. Most summoned worlds receive a rudimentary version of the system, stripped down of its complexities, simplified in its numbers, and made easily digestible for the masses. Silas finally felt a hint of relief. He wasn't crazy after all. When he thought about it, what kind of system would the dinosaurs have been given? Would they even be able to understand one as complicated as what Silas was using? Maybe theirs was dumbed down even further into a series of images or emotions or instinctual understandings. The answer of the madness key also seemed to imply that there was a better version of the system, or maybe even several forms of upgrades, but he restrained himself from asking about it. This satisfied one need, but he had other, more pressing needs. It was unlikely that he would be able to upgrade the system anytime soon, anyway. Turning his attention toward the common gene crystal, he asked a question that was far more important to his immediate success. How do you use the common gene crystal? Common gene crystals are gene fusion devices capable of inputting common physical and mental genes, and outputting a unique gene. Depending on the capacity, one can make more or less complex unique genes, with the weakest outcome being a unique fragmented gene, and the strongest being a unique bronze gene. In order to begin, one needs to start with a foundation. This can be a skill, a comprehension, a title, a treasure, or a freshly slain beast. With this foundation, the gene crystal will enter a state of dormancy. Upon awaking, it will provide an evolution tree and gene requirements to meet the target goal depending on the path taken. These gene requirements will list the number and combination of genes necessary to successfully fuse the unique gene. A gene crystal can be used more than once, but its durability is variable. The closer to its gene capacity you go, the more durability it will lose per use. Chance of succeeding in absorbing a gene crystal created unique gene is also variable. Gene crystal can be sacrificed for an improved success rate dependent on capacity. At 10 capacity, there will be a 50% chance of success. At 50 capacity, there will be a 90% chance. Scylla's eyes lit up. After 2 questions, he was starting to get a bit of a better understanding. It seemed that his question didn't need to be too specific to get him a wide range of information. But what would happen if he purposely made it too broad? How do I complete the summoned Ascension? Become strong.